Hi, everybody. I hope that you're having a great summer, but I also hope that you take a little time to listen to this video. We're coming to you a little bit earlier this year because we really want to roll out our theme. It's so good. The verse for our vision is so good because God is so good. I'm just going to ask you up front to forgive any papers moving and pages, distracting you. There's a whole lot that came together for this mission, for this vision statement for this year. So just bear with me because I'm going to be going all over the place. We're going to be in and out of the Bible. We're going to be talking about our founding fathers and movies and all kinds of things. So bear with me, but come along for the ride. All right, here we go. We're going to start, and I have to give a shout out to the people at Faith Bible. That is where I attend. And this year we just finished the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. I am a lover of the Old Testament, and so I have been fully and 100% all in engaged in these two books. And so I'm just going to summarize what has happened up to this point before I read to you where we're going to go. Let's start with Ezra. Ezra was a priest, and he was living in captivity, and he heard that the temple had been destroyed. And so, of course, as a priest, he said, I need to go repair the temple. He petitioned the king, and the king essentially gave him everything he would need to fill the temple. So Ezra travels to Jerusalem, and he repairs the temple. Fast forward 13 years, and Nehemiah, who is a cupbearer to the king of Persia, Artaxerxes, is serving the king. And in chapter 1 of Nehemiah, he asks someone who's returned from Jerusalem, hey, how are the people doing? And he finds out that they're not doing well at all. What he finds out is that the wall surrounding Jerusalem is destroyed. And so this really breaks his heart. And so in chapter 1, he recognizes that there is a need for his people, and he begins praying about this. He prays, he tells no one what he's praying about, and as cupbearer to the king, it is not in his right to go to the king and tell him a concern. So he's keeping this to himself. In the meantime, he has plans going on in his head about what would happen if the king actually said yes. Fast forward, we go to chapter 2, and he's preparing in his mind what he's going to say to the king. And as he's serving the king one day, the king looks up and sees Nehemiah, and he says, Nehemiah, your countenance is off. Are you sick, or are you sad of heart? And Nehemiah is ready. He has an answer. And he says, well, king, I'm sad because I've just learned that the walls to Jerusalem are broken down. This is where my forefathers are buried, and I feel compelled to do something about it. And the king asks a question. He says, how long are you going to be gone? And Nehemiah, because he has not only been praying, he has been planning, he is ready with an answer. And so he tells the king, hey, I'm going to be gone this amount of time, and also, could I get from you permission to travel the 900 miles? So I'm going to need permission letters from you to the governors so that they know it's okay for me to be here. I think I'm going to need some timber. I think I'm going to need some people. And so he asked the king for all these things and permission to go, and the king says yes. And so what's amazing about this is that Nehemiah could not have made that decision on his own. And so not only did he pray, not only did he plan, but he was prepared for the providence of God. So when God answered his prayer, Nehemiah already had some things thought out in his mind, and he could give the person in authority some details about what he was going to be doing. All right, then we're going to move, that's chapter 2. Now we're going to move to chapter 3. And I could bore you, as I did my team, with all of the different names that helped to rebuild the wall. But I'm just going to jump in just in chapter 3 because I want you to kind of get the pattern of what is being read in chapter 3. Chapter 3 in the book of Nehemiah is really just lists the families that are working on the wall. And so I'm just going to read you like 4 verses. It says, the sons of Hassenaah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and set its doors and bolts. And next to them, Meremoth, the son of Uriah, son of Hakkoz, who repaired the other part of the wall. And next to them, Meshullam, son of Berechiah. And next to them, and next to them, and next to them. And this goes on for 30 some odd verses of all of the people who have worked next to each other on this wall. They just said, all right, we're going to work together. And so I thought about this, about the prayer and the planning and, just the providence of God. And with it being the 250th anniversary of America, I've been listening to some really neat podcasts about our country and all that went into that. And I want to read to you what the quote-unquote least spiritual, least Christian founding father had to say at a point in time where there was a crisis. The Americans are coming together and they are trying to form their government. They've been through the Revolutionary War against the king, and now they are trying to decide how they're going to live and how the states are going to interact with one another. And they have reached an impasse. And so now Ben Franklin, who, as I mentioned, is the least Christian, if you will, of all the people in the room, makes this statement. So bear with me as I read it. He says, "The small progress we have made after 4 or 5 weeks' close attendance is, methinks, a melancholy proof of the imperfection of the human understanding. In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth and scarce able to distinguish it when it's been presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights, which is what he calls God, to illuminate our understanding? In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room for divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. All of us who were engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of superintending providence, all caps, in our favor. To that kind providence, we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity. And have we now forgotten that powerful friend, capital F, or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, which is the Bible, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without this concurring, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our partial local interest, our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach and a byword down to future ages. I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessing on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy of this city be requested to officiate in that service." So here is, like I said, one of the least religious of the founding fathers suggesting to this assembly of famous men that we all know that it should be obvious that we need to begin in prayer and that we need to be asking God to intervene on our behalf, as we did when we were facing Great Britain. And so as I'm reading what Nehemiah has done, this is exactly what he's done. He's prayed to God, he's made plans, and he has trusted in God's providence that God is going to make this happen. God is going to provide a way. Well, the people obviously didn't just listen to Nehemiah, they followed him. They came together. And so I'm going to read here to you in chapter 4, verse 14. It says, "In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. At that time the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us." Now what this is talking about is as they're building the wall, they're hearing threats and scorns and mockery from the people that live around them. And so they're yelling for help, and 10 times the people have had to leave their places on the wall to come and help and defend these families. And so now they have a reason to act. Their families are in peril. They are trying to protect one another. And so they all have a reason to come together and to act on behalf of this entire community. So they didn't just believe that this was the right thing for them to do. Now they've decided to become followers. They are following, they are acting upon what they believe. And are we not doing the same? Are we not, fighting for our families and for those we love? I mean, I remind our students all the time that the people that they're looking at are souls. They have an eternal destination. And are we not, compelled to fight for those with a soul? Let me finish going through here. So we're in verse 14 now. And I looked around and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. All right, so now they're encouraged. Work is going to pick up again. When our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah. So this was everybody. Every leader, every coach, every teacher, every person who had authority over someone was involved in this whole process. Verse 17. The leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah, who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. Isn't that what we're doing? We are laboring. We are laboring with one hand, and the weapon that we have is the Word of God. This is what Ben Franklin, brought in and reminded our founders of America. You have the Word of God. You have God himself. You prayed for him when we went up against Great Britain. Don't forget to pray for him as we're building this country. And so they are laboring with the work with one hand, carrying the weapon in the other. And I am just going to say that this is our theme verse for the year. It is Nehemiah 4, verse 17. And it says, those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held their weapon, their Bible, in the other. It's such a beautiful picture of community, everyone working towards one goal, every person having a different gift, a different skill, sometimes even a different, part of the mission. Same mission, but maybe a different role to play in that. And what I love about this is this goes hand in hand with some of the things that I personally am seeing with our students. This idea that they have to be an extraordinary person, that they have to be something special, that there has to be something, really grand about them. We think about our founding fathers, and they are in our minds, they are extraordinary men. But in reality, they were ordinary men who did extraordinary things. And by happenstance, I was watching a movie, frankly, that I didn't feel like watching. My husband wanted to watch it. And I hope that you go watch this movie, because this will make everything make sense, and you'll understand why I didn't show the clip. But the movie is called One Life. And it is about a man named Nicholas Winton, who was a London stockbroker. And he was called to Czechoslovakia on business, banking, obviously, when, as he walked down the streets in Czechoslovakia, what he saw were rows and rows of orphaned children, or families who had no home, or fathers with their children, or mothers with their children, but there were family members missing. And his heart went out to them. He started taking pictures of them, and he wound up contacting people who were, who would be considered something like social workers. And of course, they're overwhelmed trying to help the families. And the images of these children just wouldn't leave his mind. And he began dwelling on it and thinking about it and wondering how he could, help these children. And so as he's talking to the people who are already supposed to be doing things, he says, I have an idea. What if we asked our families in London to be foster parents to these children? We could send them with English visas to our families in London to take care of them. And basically everyone looks at him when they first hear this idea and they say, that's impossible. There's no way we could do this, on and on. But as Nicholas continues to work, he's able to come up and problem solve and solve some of these ideas for how they could rescue these children. And so there's a moment in the film where the four of these people are sitting at a table, and he's told them just the very few things that he's been able to do. And one of the women says, "So how are you going to make people do something about this?" And he says, ordinary people, when they hear from this, they're going to be upset. And I think they're going to want to do something. And she says, "You have a lot of faith in ordinary people." And he says, "Yes, because I am one." And as they look around the table, the gentleman to his left says, "Well, I'm an ordinary person." And she says, "I'm an ordinary person." And this just keeps going around the table. And he says, "Well, it looks like we're the army of the ordinary." And I thought, that's a great theme for this year. That's kind of what we're putting together here, is an army of ordinary people who have different skills, different capabilities, different ideas and thoughts and perspectives. And so our mission and our vision for this year is going to be Army of the Ordinary, join the mission. And so I want to just close by telling you about this interesting study that I just read, because some of you are going to say, I don't really feel like doing this. And when I say some of you, I'm probably speaking about, students. So I just wanted to read this. I wish I had time to tell you how all of these different things came about. Totally God is all I can say. I can't even explain to you the process of how I wound up finding this study, but it's so interesting and honestly sad, but also hopeful. So there was a gentleman by the name of John Calhoun. He worked for the Institute of Mental Health, and he established a study in the late 1960s, coming into the early 70s, and he called it Universe 25. Universe 25 was supposed to be an experiment about overcrowding. And so what he did was he built a city for mice, and the city could hold 4,000 mice. And in the city, there were apartments, there was space, there was nesting, plenty of nesting material. The temperature was perfect. There was food in every dish. It was kept clean. There were no predators, no struggles necessary. This was Eden. This was a utopia for all these mice. He dropped in 8 mice, 4 males, 4 females. Now, in the first 60 days, the population, as you can imagine, doubled. And this period he called the Strive period. Fast forward to day 315, and he's got more than 600 mice in the box. Great. It's built for 4,000, so population is growing. Now, around this time, things begin to change. Growth slows down. Nothing in the city has changed. Everything is still provided for the mice. But remember, there's no scarcity to overcome. There's no territory to defend. There's no struggle at all. This is supposedly utopia. Sometime after this, Dr. Calhoun began to notice a change in behavior in the males. Some of them began to turn violent. Some of them demonstrated apathy, but their behavior changed. And then there were changes in the females. Pregnancies weren't carried to term. The mothers stopped mothering. When they had babies, they ignored them and neglected them, and so the babies didn't live for very long. What he also noticed was that males didn't fight or compete with each other, and they began to develop some really abnormal behaviors. But what the mice did begin to do, both male and female, was almost incessantly groom themselves. They cleaned themselves, they picked at themselves, they made themselves look beautiful, and so he nicknamed them the beautiful ones. Now the population peaks at 2,200. This is still, reminder, half of what the box can hold. By day 600, the last baby is born. After that, no other births. On day 900, the last mouse died. In paradise, bowls still full of food and water, plenty of room to live, plenty of nesting materials, perfect temperature, no predators, nothing. And as a side note, the professor did pull out 4 beautiful mice because he just wanted to see if they could recover. And he puts them in an environment where it isn't perfect and where they're going to have to strive and figure out if they can recover. They didn't. None of them recovered. And eventually these mice, these beautiful ones that he put in this other arena, they died. So he named this study Death Squared, because there were two deaths. There was a death of the spirit and a death of the body. So how does this relate? Look at our society today. Oftentimes our young people are very apathetic. There's not much they care about. There's not much that they get happy or sad about. We have given them everything they need. Comfort is everywhere. They have all their needs met. And oftentimes we do our very best to keep them from having to struggle. But what I learned from this study, and what the ultimate statement was from Dr. Calhoun, was this: comfort is not the same as flourishing. A life with nothing left to overcome is not paradise. It is a slow surrender to death. And so what do these kids need? They need a purpose. They need a mission. They need to do something that they can believe in. They need to do something that leaves something behind. And in conjunction with this study was another study that found that when people do something that they don't want to do, all of us have to do it, right? There's certain things we don't want to do, but we know we have to. When people do things they don't want to do, it's like an instant dopamine hit. We feel accomplished. We have confidence. We have the esteem and the compulsion to go and do something else. And so there are lots of things that our kids don't want to do, but it doesn't matter. If we can help them do, sometimes if we make them do, the effect is the same. They overcome a struggle. They accomplish something. They have something to show for it. It is healthy for them, far healthier than allowing them to sit back on their laurels in comfort and not ever come up against a struggle or a situation that is difficult. These are the ways we learn. These are the places that we grow, in those moments that we are struggling and striving. And also those are the moments where we recognize that we need a Savior. And so I want to just finish up with this last thing, because I have to wrap it up into our motto. And this is shout out to Katie. So this is kind of new to me. Katie Evans brought me today. And I will just tell you again, as we talked about this mission, there were people in the room. I had not discussed this with anyone. There were people in the room who had just read a book on Ben Franklin, who had just read a book on, fill in the blank of something that we were talking about. We were all swimming in the same direction, having not even had this discussion. It was amazing. So Katie Evans came to me just today, and so I'm going to read it because it wasn't part of what I presented to my people. But I think it sums it up so well. It says, the words, "Here am I, send me," Isaiah 6:8, are the volunteer's motto. The book of Nehemiah may be considered the volunteer's handbook. In rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, Nehemiah demonstrates these principles of divinely inspired and highly effective volunteerism. So this printout, if you will, about Isaiah was found in Nehemiah. And so as we're studying Nehemiah, Katie comes across this and she's like, oh my gosh, you have to see this. Here's what it says. First, recognize a project and make it your own. Look at what Nehemiah did. He heard about a problem and he decided to do something about it. The next step was pray about it. He prayed about the project. Then he planned. He thought about all the things that he could do if, the fourth thing, God says yes. The providence of God comes into play. So I'm reading this because those are the takeaways that I got from our study at Faith Bible. 1, pray. Always pray. 2, plan while you're praying. That way, God doesn't just do for you. He puts a burden on your heart, and then he wants you to pray about it, and then he's working in the background to bring things into motion, because that's the direction that he's driving you. So you have that confidence that if something's put on your heart and you start praying about it, then you're probably headed in the right direction. You're just waiting on God to confirm that for you. The other things that were in here was confronting opposition. We are going to come up against opposition, sometimes, even in our own community. But don't turn away what God has encouraged in your heart. And so as we wrap up today, I thought that was a perfect way to wrap up the 2 verses. We're going to have our weapon, which is the Bible in one hand, and our skill in the other. And then we are going to, Isaiah 6:8, here am I, send me, as we work together to build our community. We're going to ask you to join the mission. We're going to ask you to join the team, find a role, use your gifts and talents and skills to help build our community, to help grow our community. Maybe we have some walls that need to be repaired. This is going to be a year of education for Legacy. We're going to be walking through accreditation, and so it's a year of self-examination. We're going to be asking you for feedback. We're going to be asking you for help. We're going to be asking for your ideas. So many really cool, wonderful things, and there's so much we want to do that it was like, okay, we have to tell the people now. We can't wait until, August. And so I do hope you take the time to read this. I pray that if you have time to go, read the book, read through Nehemiah, it will capture your attention. If you have a moment, see the movie One Life. It's great about how ordinary people do extraordinary things. And then I pray that you're going to hop on board with us, that you're going to join our mission. We're going to be recruiting. We're going to asking you to enlist, sign up, and we're going to ask you to take a post and come and get involved and come build our community with us. So I look forward to seeing you. Check out the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah 4:17 is our verse, and so join the army of the come be part of the army of the ordinary. You say that, and join our mission. See you soon.